Okay, looks like we're going now.
All right, and then could you switch back to the mirror board on screen?
Got it.
Okay, great. So I'll start with welcoming everybody. We're excited to have you. And there's multiple ways we'll be interacting in this session. We have the Zoom chat, as always. Feel free to connect with each other. We're hoping to help you do that with one of our first exercises as well. If you have questions for myself, David, or Trae, feel free to put those in the chat as well. We'll make sure if we don't address them during this time, we'll have those as a recording and we'll follow up on them later. And we'll be interacting using Miro. I will guide everybody through that when the time comes, but just note that it works best if you use a computer. But if you get stuck because you only have a mobile right now or your connection is not working, just revert back to the Zoom chat to interact and respond to the questions we will be asking you. Then for today's session, we're going to open up with our journey. Dave and I will share kind of how we got here. We want to do an exercise around how does everybody fit into the regeneration space to get a feel of who's in the room today. And then we're going to dive into the pattern exploration and the research there. And then we'll end with a closing question and boot everybody back to the main event. So with that, I'll let Dave start with our story.
Okay, so thanks, Danielle. Let me get rid of my controls. So we wanted to share a little bit about ourselves so you can kind of see how we got to this point and how our journey is intersecting with yours. So when I met Danielle, you'll see that we have our two branches where we met. I met Danielle when I was presenting at university. And at the time that I made that presentation, I was very much coming from kind of a techno-utopian point of view. And I was fascinated by emerging technology and the combination of technologies. And that led me to kind of ask the question, why are we seeing so much combinatorial innovation now? And so that question of why are we doing the things we're doing now led me to think kind of historically why we invented the things we did when we did. And that led me to the developmental psychology framework, spiral dynamics, as a cultural evolution type framework. And so what I did is when I looked at the relationship between human values and how they're emerging in technology, that led me to develop this, it led me to realize that we're moving to a much more cooperative type existence. We're moving from industries to ecosystems. And I developed this thing, this model, this framework called the ecosystem of you, which was meant to show how we could utilize ecosystems to enable our lives as individuals. And so I was presenting this model at Penn State. In particular, I was presenting this community ecosystem, and true to my techno-utopian way, I was trying to present how we could broadcast our emotions by connecting our bodies via technology. And
I'm sorry, there were like more than 40 people not assigned, and I had to click many buttons. So problems happen. We have to assign again. I'm really sorry, but 40 people did not assign, and then I need to manually assign. Okay. So please.
Alistair,
yeah.
Alistair, the time on this inner sessions are going to be restart as well. We're going to have the same length of time.
Yeah, we have a little bit of wiggle room. Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
Stuff happens.
And we were in a breakout room and it wasn't clear if it was being recorded or not.
It should be recorded, but by you directly, Bill. So if you can, you should be. Sorry, no, it's an important thing. Maybe I need to turn you into being a co-host, so you can record it.
Well, that's a very important thing to tell the organizer.
No, in fact, so you know, and that's the same for you, Ralph.
Yeah.
Great point, Bill, because I want to listen to them all.
Great.
Yeah, can we enter the room again? please. So yeah.
Luca,
Isn't it
So
beautiful? we
Luca,
learn
how
this
do I
mistakes?
get?
So-
How do you get us to the room again, Luca?
Unfortunately, we are opening the rooms again, and then you need to rejoin.
Oh,
So you select it. I'm
oh
opening
yeah.
them
Okay,
again.
okay.
Are you
Thank
going to
Sorry
do
for this.
a starting sign? Okay, now I get it.
Luca,
Okay. Hi, guys. Sorry about that technical snafu. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, let's try this again. I was just getting to the punchline of my opening story. Do we have everybody? I'm not sure. I think it was a one button to get us all in the room.
We are almost there. We're sitting at 31 and there were 38 originally in the room, David.
Okay. All right, so shall I?
Yeah, we're now at 32. They're trickling in.
Okay. All right. So when I was presenting at Michigan State, Penn State, Michigan State's my alma mater. When I was presenting there on this concept of a body area network of connecting our bodies to broadcast our emotions, Danielle raised her hand. She was in the audience and she said, well, why wouldn't you just tell somebody how you feel? And I said, well, but there's this network and our bodies are connected. And she goes, I don't think so. And so that was a bit of a snap out of it type moment for me when I met Danielle. All right, I'm going to follow you, Danielle.
Okay. So then I'll share the background of how I got to where the Penn State event was. And I have a serious echo happening. Dave, are you on mute?
I guess it's George again. George Poor, can you mute yourself?
Yes, I'm working on it. Just a second.
Okay. Okay, thank you, George. So the way I got there was basically a story of many smaller decisions that led to a bigger decision. My first decision and all of them were kind of guided by an interest in sustainability. So specifically, I went into chemical engineering to try to understand some of the environmental science and chemistry behind what our real environmental challenges and issues were. And so that brought me to doing things like experimental research in solar energy, waste to energy. And I came out of that research with a really unexpected conclusion. And it was a little bit disturbing. And it was that we have essentially the technical solutions to these environmental problems that everybody talks about. What we don't have are the human systems that let us to implement it. So it's really a lot to do with implementation, and that's really centered around our human systems like government, economics, and a lot of different topics that have been touched on earlier today. And so just out of coincidence, I was walking through a common area and I saw a flyer about ecosystems. And at that point, I was just super curious about what are the human systems that we could potentially change to make a difference and allow us to implement these technical solutions to solve all of our problems. And so that curiosity drove me to decide to just go to the session. And the day of, I got caught up in lab and I almost didn't go because I was going to be 20 minutes late, but I decided that it was worth going, better late than never. I kind of sheepishly walked into the room and was listening and was just very curious. I did have some outstanding questions, as Dave mentioned, but from there, the big decision was I decided that I was interested in exploring more the human side of things and how we could solve our sustainability type problems. And at this point, I'm understanding more regeneration is an interesting space. So from that point, the first thing we worked on together was that ecosystem model of how do we really reorganize around true human needs and meet those needs. And part of that was understanding what are the enabling technologies. And inevitably that led us to look into blockchain as well. And blockchain is something that can really empower governance and different economic structures. So that also led us to Eleanor Ostrom's work, which we already heard about earlier today, and that could be a system to help us better steward the commons that we all depend upon. And up to that point, our work was a lot of research and writing, and it was kind of a transition point that Dave will share moving forward.
So as Danielle said, we had been interested in ecosystems and decentralization in the blockchain space and how to enable the commons. And that kind of led us to an exploration in the platform space. That's where we got involved with Boundaryless, where we got involved with platforms. We were part of their recent research paper, part of the community that worked with them to do sense making. And that led us to create Ecosystem Intent Toolkit, which was inspired by a post from Boundaryless around basically zooming out and holding platforms accountable for doing good. From there, we expanded kind of on our understanding of sustainability, got involved and interested in the regeneration space. And then from there, we kind of collectively recognize the importance of collaboration, of collective sense making and working and living collectively. So that's where we got involved with and met Trae in the Winfinity framework that she's a part of, Adam Pearson and his Connect framework. And so all of these kind of things kind of led us to the point where we're at now. Looking about how these things intersect, we're going to be talking about patterns that we see emerging. And from here, we're not sure where things are going to go. And hopefully you'll be able to help us determine where we should go next. Okay. So that's a little bit about us. Now we're going to invite you to the board, and we'd like to learn a little bit about you. So Danielle, do you want to post the link?
Yeah, and while I do that, would you please navigate to the squiggle and introduce that first?
Okay. Okay, we're gonna do the squiggle first. Okay. So here's the exercise that we're gonna do to try to learn a little bit about each of you. So once you get into the board, we've created this, what we've referred to the squiggle, which is kind of a combination of the areas that we see emerging around regeneration. So the components of regeneration are along the bottom, like decentralized ledger technology, smart contracts, participatory accounting, cultural evolution, intent, mindset, and so on. So you can see along the bottom here, all these different areas that are emerging and coming together to enable us to create a regenerative kind of existence. And then on the top, we have these purpose-driven contexts, which are how to apply regenerative thinking, how to apply platform thinking, whether you're looking at regenerative enterprises or eco villages or urban sustainability. So we've put a number of these here. We've left some that are undefined. If you guys want to take an opportunity to tell us, where are you working? What are you working on? Where are your experiences? And what are your interests? So that's what we'd like to try to do now.
So you'll see in the chat, I've posted a link. And as you're getting to that, I'll describe how you can navigate once you get into the board. So when you're in the board, the navigation is a bit like PowerPoint. Let me zoom in to the spot we need to be. So you can see, if you just still look at the Zoom screen here, on the bottom left, where I have a red circle, that's a menu that allows you to bring frames up. And once you click on that, the menu expands and you're going to want to click the leftmost button. So it looks like a tic-tac-toe board or something. That leads you to a new pop-up menu, one of two options. It might look blank, the top, but it'll give you a list of frames, or it might look like the bottom with images. So we're going to ask that you orient yourself towards the frame that looks like the squiggle. or if you have the numbers, Dave, could you tell me what number frame this should be?
The squiggle is frame number 5.
Or frame number 5. The other thing we'll have you guys do is create a sticky note. So you can, without clicking on anything else, type in the letter N, and then when you click, it will create a sticky note. Once you have that sticky note, you can double click it and start typing within it. Okay, I'm seeing someone ask me to review that process again. So step number 1, click on the link and get in the mural board. It'll land you somewhere and it's not going to be in the squiggle. So to make that menu appear, the bottom left corner of your screen will have a menu. It's basically a single button, or it might be a menu. If it's only a single button, you click it to expand. So you can see on the right side of the screen here, the expanded version. And the leftmost button will bring up a new menu to click on either the image of the squiggle. It depends on your settings, so don't worry. If you see the squiggle, click on it, or frame number 5. Okay, let me reshare the link. Okay, so what we want you to do in here, great, I see a bunch of people.
There we go.
Create a sticky note with your name and put it in your interest areas, like Dave said. Don't worry if you don't feel like you're experienced in something or if you haven't worked there before in earnest. We're really just trying to find in the room, where are people gravitated towards, or maybe we're really spread out. So now I'll give just some quiet time for a couple of minutes for people to look through the different options and place themselves in here. Feel free to copy yourself multiple times as well. We understand there's not just a single interest area. And then once we're done with this, we'll take a look at who's in the room today. And as you're adding things, try to go radially out, up and down, so that we can see who's sitting in the same cluster. If we group out horizontally, it'll be hard to tell which bucket you're falling under. So just keep that in mind as well when you're posting in.
Yeah, it's a bit of an experiment with this graphic to see how much information we can get into it.
It's really exciting already, though, to see all the different areas and start to understand that there's diversity of interest, but a few clusters seem to be appearing. Okay, I'll give you a 30-second warning. After 30 seconds, we'll stop moving and take a look. Okay, so feel free to continue putting your name places. This will be a live document even after today. For just a second, Dave, would you be able to hide cursors so we can see more clearly where the sticky notes sit? To the left, one more of that icon. Yep. Thank you. Okay, so I'm seeing clusters on the bottom left of the middle. So let's zoom in and see what that might be. So community and collaboration. It looks like cultural evolution, intent and mindset has quite a few people feeling connected and interested to that topic, including ecosystem health and flow, decentralized cooperative and governance. So that's some interest areas of the group. On the top, I see regenerative enterprise. We have a clustering, regenerative communities, looks like urban sustainability. And thank you so much for the people who added some new topics in here. I see regenerative local learning communities, collaborative economy. So feel free to look in, zoom into those buckets that you put yourself on, see who else is there. See if there's anybody that you might be interested in connecting to, and just take note of who else is kind of in your space. So that concludes the first activity, and we'll now move on to the regenerative patterns research.
Okay. So I'm going to give an overview. If people want to follow me, or can I summon?
Yeah, summon everybody.
Okay. I'm going to give an overview of the exercise that we're going through. It's ongoing, it's preliminary, it's by no means the answer to what's happening in the regeneration space. It is nascent. We recognize that in our own research, we have our own biases as well. Just to give some context, how we got to trying to look for patterns in regeneration, we created a toolkit that I mentioned in our opening journey called the Ecosystem Intent Toolkit, which is really meant to help communities, innovators, entrepreneurs, as they're organizing, to ask some kind of key questions about the kind of aspirations and environment they want to create for their ventures. And so we created this toolkit, which has these questions. What's important? What's possible? Who do you want to engage with? What's your collective impact? What's the kind of environment that you want to create? More specifically, then, what's your idea? And then we have some questions and canvases and exercises in the toolkit around how to make ideas more valuable. So what we wanted to do in the patterns of regeneration are create pattern cards that enable people to access examples as they're trying to answer these questions. So they can see how others have tried to answer these questions as they were going through a similar journey. Okay, so to create the pattern cards, we drew influence from a number of different areas. So we started with regenerative principles. We laid out principles that come from biomimicry, the energy network sciences, and the Capital Institute, which are pretty closely related to each other. So we wanted to know where there are patterns emerging, examples emerging that embody these principles. Okay. The next thing we did is we drew inspiration from the pattern cards that exist around platforms. And so this is part of Platform Design Toolkit, and they have created these pattern cards around the patterns that are emerging around the development of platforms. Okay. The next thing we did was actually create some hypotheses around what we thought we would see in the research. What are the patterns that we think are emerging? So these are just some examples of things that we thought could end up being pattern cards, okay? And then lastly, we tried to get an idea for the areas that are embodied in regeneration or regenerative platforms. And there are a number of different areas. As we've said, it's emerging, it's nascent. We don't really know exactly how to define regeneration. Lots of different definitions out there. But we think the areas that are relevant here in general buckets around localism, decentralization and cooperative type organizing, and then regenerative sustainable type initiatives. So these are the things that we use to influence. And the idea is that we'll go from our hypotheses eventually to what we see as regenerative patterns that will populate this box. But we're hoping to learn a little bit from you today and to determine what makes sense and where to go next in terms of this research. Okay, and I'm going to turn it to Danielle to give you some insight into what we're finding.
So if you'd like to follow me, Dave.
Got it.
All right. So the other thing we did was a research survey of regeneration work that is happening now. And this was based on us looking into projects, organizations that explicitly said we're doing regeneration, but also ones that were correlated to the principles that Dave mentioned. So they might not have said they were trying to regenerate something, but they were exhibiting some principle of regeneration. And what we did with that clustering of examples is we started to put similarities together. We created sets of themes, we unbundled them, we rethemed them, and then we were starting to see some major groupings. So the major themes we have 7 of. And I'd like you to take note, maybe on paper or just mentally, of which one you find the most interesting, because then the next activity will ask you to select one of them to reflect on. So within each of those major groupings, those 7 themes, we started to see patterns. And so those are kind of the sub-themes you'll see in here. And I'll go through one by one to try to give you as best a sense as we can in this time frame what we were seeing come out of all of this. So number 1 is improve human interoperability, coherence, and connection. I think this resonates well with some of the things we were hearing earlier about learning happens best in small groups and the need for people to be trusting of each other and having honest conversations. And we're also connecting it, if you're familiar with the yin-yang philosophy, to yin, the nurturing sort of energy. In this, we saw patterns around learning, much like events, part of the reason for this event today, but that happens in basically every space. There's a lot of activity around learning. There were things around reducing barriers to collaboration. So specifically, we heard from pro-social today, but also of interest is, we mentioned Winfinity, Connect, and then we also saw something called the Jenna Alliance, which was, they're kind of common ways of looking about how do you keep open space to collaborate, where rather than saying this is what we're working on together, you allow that group who wants to work together to figure out what they can work on. So that was just one specific example within the patterns. Shared identity was related to finding common ground amongst people, and there were several examples connected to Indigenous cultures and the empowerment you can get from having that shared identity, as well as storytelling. Again, storytelling, I wouldn't say is unique to this space, but it was a good example that we definitely see coming out in regeneration to help move it forward. So I'll do the same pattern with these other 7. I'll walk through the sub patterns and I'll highlight just a single example. So we'll move on to the next one, which is infrastructure that allows regeneration to emerge. Here we also correlate it to the young energy around being active and action-oriented. And there's a larger volume of activity here that we saw around building the foundational blocks we need to be empowered to do regenerative work. So the first sub-theme here was enabling containers, and that's just talking about what are the things that help regeneration activities come together. So there was a lot of platform and marketplace type examples. One of them here was called Rewild. So it was a company that worked to bring together regenerative food products so that people who wanted to sell regenerative food in their marketplace, for example, were able to do that much more easily because this integrator or marketplace had pulled together those suppliers and made them easily accessible, which also helps the growers as well. Next, tokenizing regenerative action. So this is looking at how do we break some of those binding patterns of economics with tokenizing, and looking at new patterns of economic empowerment. And this next one, I think the most surprised of all the patterns, governing a common pool resource to reduce risk. So common pool resource is just a shared resource that everybody has, and intentionally governing it to reduce the risk of a regenerative project or activity. So the example here was using land and a cooperative network to make sure that nobody could come in and buy it. So they governed it intentionally so that others couldn't extract and take small ownership of that land, which was pertinent to that cooperative success. We saw people doing creating knowledge commons. So there's a lot of global shared knowledge in the space. And then a whole plethora of professional services, consulting work, products to help others more easily do regenerative work. I would say Share Tribe as an example. They're a service that really empowers others to take on that sort of work. Moving on to number 3, networking to create beneficial interdependencies. So there are a few things that were a little bit more unique where they were really looking at how to break the boundaries of our traditional institutions. Enabling life experiences was an example around a company trying to pull together things so that individuals going about their daily life can more easily choose regenerative options. And so that's realizing that you have to provide for a huge number of things to make that happen. So that's the break across normal boundaries. Multi-sector work, as well as shared thresholds and allocations. So realizing that even though we define ourselves maybe as a single enterprise, the resources that we use go way beyond our boundaries, and we share that with others. So how do we maybe co-govern those things together? Moving on to number 4 of 7, about halfway through, we have agent-centric interdependent organizations. And this was about looking at ways of organizing or tools to make the individual have more power. So we saw some examples of balanced flow, which is paying attention to where are resources, including money, physical resources, information, where is it flowing, how does it accumulate, and is that a sustainable balance? Cooperative ownership, I think, is a more familiar concept for people around giving the employees or participants of an organization fractional ownership so that they are actually the stakeholders of the organization. There's so many examples out there. We did not try to list them all. Decentralized participatory governance is also highly using blockchain to make sure that no one person can gain power in the system, and how do you help other people really participate in those systems. So the discrete example to share here is Aragon, which is a software tool built to help people basically have a plug and play governance system. So it's kind of interesting to think about how that might connect to what Ted Rao was speaking about with governance being our organizational grammar. So that even if you're a small organization or you're just a group getting together, you have access to very simple governance that's pre-set up that you can test out and use for your organization. And then the final pattern under number 4 here is individual health is synonymous with the health of the whole. So there's a lot of work and companies doing stuff around just individual health and how that is so important if you're trying to have a healthy society. Moving on to number 5. This is redefining value. And I think this is pretty pertinent to what's happening across regeneration, is realizing that our traditional economic value definition is not always the only type of value you need to pay attention to. And how can we optimize more than just economic value in the way that we're all working together? One of the things we saw here was nested assets. That's looking at accounting differently so that you can more collaboratively think about accounting. Like if we're working together, collaborating in a group, how do I know what value I should get out of that work versus the other 5 people I was working together with? Pluralizing value is looking at, I think the Capital Institute defines 9 different types of value, but these are examples where we saw them embodying and looking at the fact that there's more than economic value. A lot of them really focus in on the value of community. And then the last pattern here was finance supporting the future. So I think I could also relate this to Shared Tribe, where they're looking at how to change their economic financial structure so that in the future, they wouldn't sell out, they wouldn't become extractive. And so there's quite a few different interesting nuances and models that you can find across different cooperatives, organizations, networks in here that we ran across. Okay. And then moving down to our last row here, we have literal regeneration. Although we're focusing on the confluence of platforms and regeneration in this session, we couldn't leave out some of the very explicit work being done by people to rebuild the land, make our soils healthier. Again, think about how do we co-live together in ways that are more regenerative. So we saw agriculture, housing, and the circular economy also showed up as people were really thinking about resource flows and how can we build things in a way that help to make our environments healthy again. And then last but not least, we have localism and things that are being done in context. So I'm pretty sure Simone touched on this in his opening framing conversation around things becoming more localized. And there was quite a few examples of empowering local communities where they really start to not think about the paradigm of I'm here to help a community, but the paradigm of this community has a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of capabilities. How could I maybe be of service to them? So there is an example here where they are empowering communities who are within refugee camps to solve their own problems through entrepreneurship. So that's realizing there's value in that community. We don't need to save them. They can be their own source of community regeneration. Cosmo-local is the model where globally there's a shared design and then locally there's the implementation of that design where it might be tweaked in context. There are a lot of manufacturing type models going on in that pattern. And then finally, fitting to the bioregion and culture. So becoming aware of and making changes to the way you're doing things based on what bioregion do I sit in and am I part of, what culture am I a part of, and what does that mean? Okay, so the next thing we'll do is I will pause for about 10 seconds just to let people breathe because I know that's a lot of information all at once. So I'm going to pause for 10 seconds first.
There are a couple of questions, so just let me know when you would like me to bring those to your attention.
I think now could be a fine time.
Okay, the first question comes from Yash. It's with regard to just the fact that there's a lot of terms and how are you wanting us to address how we're going to choose, because everybody has their own interpretations, and for them to come to your interpretations or your definitions in such a short period of time, how do you best want us to address that?
So I would just say that I'm not extremely concerned about that because we have our own interpretation. We can't expect people to understand our interpretation right now. So I think it's okay for them to bring their own interpretation as they pick things and respond to it. Dave, did you want to add?
Yeah. We're interested in what you're seeing, what your interests are, and just from your own perspective, really. So if there's anything among these 7 areas or even within them that resonates, tell us. You know, we want to hear what your perspectives are.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. The second question is a little more specific. It comes from Brian with regard to holochain and when is it appropriate to address about what it is about holochain that seems promising, especially for people who don't understand.
I would encourage you to put that in your reflection. So the next step here is we're going to ask people to reflect. So anywhere in here that you think is hitting on what you think is the most important about holochain, I would recommend picking that and then writing about that. We'll have about 5 minutes for people to do that once we move into reflection.
Will the pattern, George is asking, will the pattern cards and the themed examples be available to work with?
Yes, definitely. This board and is going to be available to everybody after. It's going to be a living, breathing document, and we'll ask you how you guys want to engage afterwards is our final kind of question. So we're interested to hear how this stuff is resonating and how you might foresee us working through some of this stuff together.
Thank you, David.
Thanks for sharing those and watching for the questions, Trae. So let's move in then to the next exercise. If you remember to use actually, no, let's summon people, Dave. It's just easier.
Okay, you want to, you want me to?
I can.
Okay.
So we'll move to the next space of the board. The themes are going to be there. So we're not going to ask you to remember what all of those themes were. So let me summon everybody. Take a minute, find which of the 7 themes you are curious about, interested in, have something exciting you'd like to share related to it, and pick a cluster of sticky notes. The rest of the time here will be mostly spent allowing you to just reflect on it. It can be about what it means to you, or we're really just keeping it quite open. And in the time, we'll have about 5 minutes for you to do this. Feel free to also look at what other people are writing, and you can reflect on that as well. So we're now just giving you time and space to reflect and share back with us and the rest of the participants, because this will be shared after, what it brings to mind in the categories.
All right, you want me to set the timer, Danielle? And how are we doing on time?
So we have 5 minutes until we head into the closing. So I think we give people...
No, I sent a message to everybody. We will extend up until the full hour. So you in total still have like 25 minutes. So you have ample room. You don't need to rush through. I will tell everyone.
Okay, thank you, Alistair.
Okay, so how much time should we set for the reflection?
I would give people 6 minutes is fine. And then what we'll do is we'll give people a reminder to look at other people's and reflect on that. And then we'll allow them to volunteer to share.
Okay.
So we'll follow through those.
All right, very good. I'll set the timer now.
And just one final reminder, if you have Miro issues, feel free to post into the Zoom chat and we'll make sure to capture that.
We've got about 90 seconds left. How are people doing on time? Do you need more time to reflect?
Yes.
Yes?
Yeah,
Danielle,
I'm
Trae.
looking in the Zoom, David, and I'm getting nods, but I think people are so intensely in the board that they're so
Okay.
just giving you a heads up on that.
All right. How much, Danielle, help me with the math. How much should we add?
Go ahead and
Okay.
add 4 more minutes.
David, could you please pop the link for the mural board back in the chat? We have a gentleman asking for it again. Beautiful, thank you.
Okay, so what we're gonna do next, we have 10 minutes remaining. And I saw just some reflections in the chat that this feels rushed, and from being on the other side of this and participating before, that's how they usually feel and go. So we respect that people didn't get to fully reflect on these topics, but we're excited to also hear what did come to mind even in such a short time. So we'd like to take the final, we'll take, I guess, 9 minutes now. We're gonna ask volunteers who would like to share some of their thoughts to raise their hand using Zoom. So in your bottom menu bar where you would normally go to mute or unmute yourself, if you go to the far right, there's an option called reactions. And when you click on that, you'll see a big button on the bottom that says raise hand. So if you'd like to volunteer to share, raise your hand. We'll have Trae call on people. And if possible, see if you can play off something that another person has shared to see where there's some connections coming out of everybody's reflections.
Excellent. The first person who put their hand up was Jillian. Please
I was a little afraid of that. Yeah. Yeah, I'm not 100% clear if you want reflections just on this last exercise or everything that we've been doing.
I think mostly on just this last exercise.
Yeah, I'm somebody who's worked holistically for a long time, 30 years, well ahead of my time. It's very validating and stimulating to see and feel the work that you're doing to describe the patterns of the whole. And it's showing me how I've worked in a whole bunch of different fields, but they're always coherent to me in terms of I think there's a meta level principle here that maybe is in the heart center of your wheel of 7. And I think when I put up my hand, I was more prepared to speak to this set as a whole. But really, while I have the microphone, I would say that with the literal landscape or literal regeneration, there's a way that within permaculture, even though the 3 ethics are earth care, people care, and fair share, there's been a very strong skew towards earth care. And I would say that for me, literal regeneration also in 6 also very much includes humanity, both our internal regeneration and moreover the regeneration between people and the matrices of all the ways that we construct value and flow power and etc. That in order to be able to do what you're quoting or proposing as literal regeneration, it very much for me includes our personal work, because I've seen our lack of capacity in human systems to be the main limiting factor in every system I've ever worked in.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Jillian. And next we have Dill Green. Dill, please feel free to unmute yourself.
Thanks. Hi. I've just been scooting around all the contributions to try and find something to reflect on that connects with what I wrote. And right at the end, I found the Open Food Network. I was writing in 1 and this is in 7, or 2 maybe. And they also are working on what I was trying to talk about, which is the layer below platforms. So platforms tend to result in a sort of archipelago world of lovely islands, which are locally correct if they work, and that's great. But when it comes to federating those together for network effects, it turns out that they very often are built on different standards. And so the Cosmo-Local thing where the Open Food Network is very interesting. We've just been in a project with them where they've been looking at trying to improve local last mile logistics, which is incredibly expensive and is a big hurdle for local food aggregation, and come to the conclusion that if they built something just for Open Food Network users, it couldn't really get going in any context, and realize that they needed to talk to other equivalent local food sales platforms, of which there's a burgeoning little ecosystem, or not ecosystem, but burgeoning little market sector, and try and broker some data interoperability standards that sit a layer below platforms. And so then to talk about the project that I'm working on, the Credit Commons, is aiming to do exactly that for transaction data, to make it possible for all sorts of economic entities, however they work internally, to be able to connect together, to transact across boundaries without having to build shared databases or change how they understand the world. Because things like a transaction can be extraordinarily simply defined. And it's the same mechanism that powers the internet. The HTTP packet, again, is very, very simply defined, but it can carry an enormous variety of information. It's the same idea as the shipping crate, which made global transportation of goods much more practical. So that protocol layer, I think, is missing from your set of ideas. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, and we have a hand raised as well as bells ready to ring from George, just to give you a heads up that the 10-minute mark has gone by. And George, do you have comments that you would like to share?
Yeah, it's a reflection about the significance of the totality of the work that Danielle and David are doing. You know, I've been studying and sometimes contributing to the various pathways to humanity's phase shift. And I believe that what you are doing is really the most significant among the many other things that I am aware of. For one, because you don't start with an ideology, but you're observing and synthesizing the actual trends that are happening in the world and creating a beautiful framework, synthesizing those trends, making it practical, useful through the pattern cards and themed examples, without totalizing it, without creating a new center of the universe like many world changers are trying to do. So a big heartfelt thank you to you.
Thank you, George.
Thank you so much. Now, there are a couple of questions that were in the chat, and so I'm just wondering, can we address those now?
We've got about a minute.
Okay. The first one was from Arlene. She was just wondering what brought you to those 7 categories.
That was really just a good old-fashioned design thinking, grouping, and type exercise that Danielle and I did. Again, we're open that these might not be the right groupings, that there might be cross interrelations between these, or there might be other ones that we missed. It was based on our own biases, admittedly, and so yes, it was pretty much just once we had the examples, we grouped them and we themed them.
And I can just share that, having done a little bit of work with David and Danielle, that these 2 individuals are very much keeping their eyes and ears open and are willing to shift and adjust and as new information comes in, and that's the whole purpose of this session. So thank you for that. There's a quick question here from Dave with regard to, you know, he's very curious about education learning. especially the stuff that was highlighted by Indy and John at the very beginning. And just wondering, is this implied in what you have set up? Or is it integrated or embedded? It just sort of feels like it's not explicitly stated, but that it's somehow it's in there.
We had a pattern for learning, yeah. If I understood correctly, I think it was in the first one. Yeah, I think it was the first one we went through.
And it is entirely possible that in the midst of the, all the information, and it's also possible that I am not 100% representing David's questions. So Dave, if you have something further that you want to speak to, please feel free to raise your hand. But other than that, it's just a lot of comments in the chat, and it's just been really lovely to watch the interaction. So I'll pass it back to you.
Okay, so we've just got a few minutes left, and I'm gonna close us out here by coming back to our journey. And this is where you all have an opportunity to let us know where we should go next and how we might interact with you and our journeys might connect. So there's a couple things here that you see in this last one. If everybody wants to follow me, or if they want to flip back to the Zoom, well, we'll, there we go. Maybe I can just summon people. There we go. Okay, there we are. So a couple things you'll see here. If you want to receive a copy of this board or just some updates about our research as we update these pattern cards and the toolkit that they go with, you can click above, and that's a subscribe list that you can subscribe to. We'll get you a copy of the board, and we'll coordinate, communicate with you about how things are going and what we've learned from this process. We also would like to know what's on your mind about how we might collaborate, what that might look like. That's the click here at the bottom of the journey. So, on behalf of Trae and Danielle, thank you very much for joining our session. We know it went fast, and there was a lot of information, but we appreciate you spending time with us. Trae, Danielle, any comments from you before people get pulled back into the main event?
I would like to just logistically mention, I'm going to post the link in the Zoom chat to that in case some people are not on Miro. So I just posted that. But overall, thank you so much for participating. And it was really, really lovely to hear from people about them seeing themselves in this research. So that's, I think, part of what we hoped to do here.
And I'm complete, David, just really grateful to have been a support and very much looking forward to what emerges out of next steps. Do you want to address that? The final question? Yeah.
That's the click here at the bottom of the journey. If you, we really appreciate it if you'd all click there. There's the final question that talks about how we might collaborate, what your areas of interest are, and we'll share with everyone what kind of coalesces out of that.
And pause, bio break. So for everybody coming back into the plenary, we now move into a shortened 15 minutes. Pause, grab an apple, coffee, tea, whatever time zone you're in, or something maybe to calm your nerves. And we meet 1/4 past, so in 15 minutes from now. And Luca can just, share some music. And then we will move into the fish bowls, gathering everything that we have been working on in the parallel sessions. So see you back in 15 minutes. I will stay here in case there are questions. Or just to dance, Yeah, fine.
Kicking out, it's because of the music. Could you message me in the Telegram? Thank you.